Okay, we are ready.
Great. I can go ahead with the script.
Yep.
Okay. Welcome to the September 9th, 2024 meeting of the Budget and Governmental Affairs Committee. My name is Steve Perez and I am the Vice Chair of the committee. Tonight we are joined by Assistant District Manager Brendan Burke. This meeting is called to order at 6:35 p.m. As a reminder, New York state law requires all committee members who are not able to attend the meeting in person to have their cameras on and their first and last names displayed from the time the meeting is called to order until the time the meeting is adjourned. Members of the public who are attending virtually, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. Members of the public who are here in person, you can raise any questions that you have by raising your hand. If there is time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. And I think David volunteered to take minutes. Thank you very much. Now we will take attendance by roll call.
Committee members, I will call your names. When your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. Tanya Arias. I don't see her. Jim Collins.
Here.
B. Disman won't be with us tonight. Rob Parfin.
Present.
Nat Kalani.
Present.
Ava Marie Lassiter.
Present.
David Lowenstein.
Present.
Reshma Patel also isn't with us tonight. Steve Perez.
Present.
And Roberto Ruiz Melendez, I also don't see here tonight. We do not have quorum.
Okay, so the agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and is reflected on the screen before you. If there is no objection, we will adopt the agenda. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, please raise your hand. Seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. The minutes from June's meeting are still being drafted. Once they are ready for adoption, they will be sent to the committee for review. Okay, so ground rules for the meeting. In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. No one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members who are here in person, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand and I will identify you so you can speak. Committee members unable to attend in person, if you have a question about committee business, you may raise your hand through Zoom and I will identify you so you can speak. All committee members, it is extremely important that only one person speak at a time so that members of the public watching at home can understand what is being said by each committee member. The chat function for committee members present via Zoom should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you are having or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. So tonight's agenda, the first topic we have here is the discussion of redistricting reforms for New York State. And before we jump into the topic, I just want to extend a welcome to our new committee member, Rob.
Hello.
Thank you.
And Tanya will welcome her at the next meeting. She's able to join us. So let me just give a brief update. I think Brendan shared some material beforehand with the committee members, but just to give some context around how this ended up on the agenda, over the summer, the Center for New York City Law held a seminar on redistricting. And essentially, I attended that seminar in June, and it brought together a lot of the folks who were involved in the redistricting process the first time around. And so members of the commission were there who participated in the Independent Redistricting Commission. There were academics there. There were people who were from voter advocacy groups. And so they had this long discussion about what went wrong, how to reform the process, how to make it better next time around. So we thought it was germane to kind of bring this into our committee to discuss how we would want to engage with this issue going forward. Just for those of you who didn't read the materials, or maybe just to refresh everyone's memory, what happened the last time. So 2022 was a rather chaotic redistricting process because it was the first time that we in New York State had what was called an independent redistricting commission. It was supposed to draw maps that were kind of independent from the legislature, but what ended up happening was the IRC was unable to produce maps that were essentially, accepted. So the legislature kind of went with its own maps. Then there was, of course, court cases that, lawsuits that were filed against that. And what happened was then a special master was appointed by the court to draw the maps. Ultimately, those were the maps that were used for the 2022 election. But then essentially there was another lawsuit that was filed that said we don't want to use those maps for the subsequent elections. And so they kind of went back through the process. The IRC created another set of maps. Those were also not accepted by the legislature, which adopted its own maps. But the maps were essentially not so different from what the special master had drawn up. So those are essentially the maps that that were used for the 2024 and will be used for subsequent voting sessions. So essentially, what all of this seminar went through was just to suggest ways that the process could look different in the future, and based on the recommendations from people who are involved, but also looking at best practices from other states. And they basically said, now is the time to think about this, because although this is not going to happen until the next census in 2030, because it requires a constitutional amendment, it needs 2 successive legislatures to vote on this before it then gets put to the voters. So if we want to do anything different, we actually have to start now. And it is urgent before the next legislative session starts. So that's why we thought it would be germane to sort of bring it up at this meeting to see if this is something that we want to weigh in on. And just to highlight some of the recommendations that came out of this body of people who were discussing it. They suggested, one, having an independent commission that's not appointed by elected officials with an odd number of members, because that was why the IRC was unable to come up with a map to begin with. 2, they thought the commission should be funded by the state government, also free from elected official control. There was sort of some maneuvering that went on that stalled the original makeup of the commission because of how it was going to be funded and how it was going to be staffed. And then the Constitution should also prioritize the criteria that the commission uses to draw the map. So it listed out, a set of criteria that they should follow, which they did, but the problem was it didn't say, well, which criteria were more important than others. And so that left a lot of, questions and room for discussion about, well, should I look at this point of view or another point of view when deciding, am I going to draw the lines in such and such a way? And then finally, at the end of the day, what happened in this situation was the IRC their maps were not used because the legislature decided they wanted final say. And so it could be clearer if there was sort of like more of a mechanism for the legislature to kind of weigh in, but the IRC to ultimately say, like, here are the maps, and we've, followed all the criteria, and therefore that would be the process. So I just wanted to open it up now to members of the committee to ask questions or make any observations they would like to make about kind of this topic.
I just wanted to know, is there now going to be an IRC 2.0? Is that where we are now? Would this community board be communicating with IRC 2.0? Is that, who would we be communicating with in terms of what this community board would like to see done regarding the redistricting?
Well, I think if we ultimately decided we wanted to write a resolution about how we would want to see it changed, we'd be speaking to, the resolutions would be going to the electeds to say like, this is a priority for the legislature, because they have to take it up and change the process. Without that, the IRC is what it is. You know, the way it happened not last time is it's still in the state constitution. So there is still an independent registering commission who is charged with following the criteria, following the census, deciding how the maps will be used for the 2030 election. But from now until 2030, we are going to be using the maps that have been used since 2024 this year and on for the next 6 years. This is forward looking to say like the elections that would happen during the next process.
I thought in your article that actually we were shooting for a 2028. That if we could have something done, that at least with that election, it would.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct. So the 2028, that'd be the last chance that we have to change it before the census, and then, because that's the timeline. So yeah, that's why starting now, because when you look at the timeline, it seems very far away, but it's actually something that you need to work on kind of in the next legislative session.
When is the next legislative session?
I mean, it starts this coming year.
It starts next January.
Oh, that's
January
Okay.
2026.
Yeah. 25.
25.
So the goal is to advocate for some legislation along the lines of these reforms that you're suggesting. Are any other community boards, did they attend or anyone else interested in working in this?
Yeah, I'm not aware if we have other community boards who are either in attendance at the seminar or who are looking at this, but we could be sort of one of the early adopters and then see if there's appetite for us as a committee to pass a resolution and then go from there. I see Nat has his hand raised.
Thanks. Yeah. The one thing I would add just for new members of the committee is when the last redistricting process happened, it was pretty messy for our sort of community board and community district, where they basically moved part of our district to like a district with queens, and there's like sort of a mess. So I think our like board is sort of primed to be like caring about these issues more than some other boards where they haven't had to think about those things. So I would say like, I think that does put us in a position where one, we have like pretty good reason to actually want to focus on this and make it as like efficient a process as possible. But two, I think it just means that like some other boards haven't had to deal with a lot of the issues we've had to in the past. So they also just won't be thinking about it until we bring it up. And I think that like some of them would be supportive. I think we have to have those conversations. But I think that just makes it one of the reasons why we're the first people to actually be bringing this type of thing up.
Thanks, Nat. That's a very important point to raise. And I also actually wanted to piggybacking on that, I wanted to point out that this board passed a resolution in January 2023 opposing the assembly district lines that were drawn. So I don't know if that was because the assembly district was also moved. So they took part of our district in Midtown East and moved it to Queens, the Queens district. And then we as a board voted saying, please don't do that. We are opposed to that. And so I don't know if that helped in the advocacy, but ultimately that was not the case. Our district was kind of preserved on the assembly side. It was not put into Queens. So.
But the part for this state.
Senate, yeah.
Right.
We didn't have a chance to weigh in on that change, but on the assembly, at least that's my understanding.
So one of our requests will be obviously a more coherent district, right? That'd be top line issue for us.
Correct, because that's one of the criteria of it's sort of like do not divide communities. It should be like logical in the way that they draw the lines. It's strange in New York that they would divide boroughs, but it's hard to know exactly how they're thinking about what they're thinking about when they're drawing the lines. So.
Yeah, and the resolution for the record is up right now, particularly having the resolved clause.
Yeah, so it was 60 blocks of Manhattan East, Roosevelt Island to Queens-based Assembly District. And we wanted those to be remaining a Manhattan-based State Assembly District. which ultimately the lines shifted a little bit. If you look at the maps, there's an interesting, I don't know, Brendan, you can put it in the chat, but there's an interesting link. It's called newyork.redistricting.org or something like that. I think I shared the link with Brendan earlier, but you can see how the maps change, and has like an interactive feature where you can show like, and it's all the different combinations, like the special master maps, the congressional map that they used to have, the ones that they use now, the ones that were approved, so you can kind of see the changes. And
Yeah, I'll try and, I've found the link. I'll see if I can configure it in a way that's useful for the committee. So just give me.
it's just an interesting tool if you want to take a look at it. But I guess the questions that I have for the committee is, do we want to draft a resolution urging our elected officials to make changes to this redistricting process? Or what's the
I don't see a
appetite?
problem with it. I think it's appropriate to go ahead and list something with the 5-member committee, and then leave it at that. I don't know if we need to go any further than that, and just talk about the exigency of getting it done. I don't think we can act on it tonight because we don't have a quorum, but that's what I would suggest.
I didn't have any issue with any of the recommendations that you mentioned from your summer. And then just layering in the specific issue with our district.
Yeah.
Also, just a random aside, I have the redistricting in you link that Steve, you shared with me earlier.
Okay, great.
In fact, what I'm showing on the map right now is the proposed redistricting that we proposed in our January 2023 resolution, which would have put parts of our neighborhood in the same district as parts of Astoria and Long Island City. So anyway, just wanted to point that out.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on?
It's very painful for me to look at that because I live right in that little part that is connected to Queens. I just, so.
Could you send?
Which district are you talking about? Are you talking about the Senate district?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Gonzalez district, right?
The Gonzalez district,
I'm sorry.
Christian
Yeah.
Gonzalez is.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes.
It, like I say, I think, basically what you wrote in your op-ed, and did you send it off to city and state? I think it'll get
No,
more
I
attention
haven't.
there than
I
our resolution.
think Brendan shared it with the committee, but that's all his.
Yeah, send it to city and state. It'll get mentioned there. Then send it to Cranes as well.
So I think, yeah, to Jim's point, we're not going to be giving really specific drill down recommendations, but I think the broad points that we can say we want.
Yeah, for sure.
Fair, transparent, independent legislative process that doesn't repeat some of the same mistakes from this last time around. And then urge our electeds, who really are the ones who have to take it up, would be something that we could do. And I could take a stab at drafting a resolution and kind of bringing it the next time around to when we have quorum, hopefully, and then we can discuss it at the next meeting.
Okay,
That'd be great.
yeah,
And talk about the exigencies of getting it out quickly, because as you say, it has to go through 2 separate legislatures.
Yeah. Great.
I just have a question because to me, this is a major project and we don't have quorum here. I just wanted to ask Brendan, I thought that originally it would be 4 that would make quorum, so that at least we could vote on resolutions and so forth. It's not, it's now 6 for our committee.
Yeah, so what's happened is a couple new members of the board, were, given budget and governmental affairs as one of their committees. And quorum is more than half of committee members need to be present, either present in person or attending virtually due to a disability. More than half is 6, and we don't have more than half who are eligible. Like there are 4 people present in person. There's 1 person attending online due to a temporary disability. And we need 6 for quorum.
Well, are some of the new members aware that some of us actually have to be on site for, because I love the dialogue, but what can we do today? I don't really see what we can do today, so.
Yeah, that was mentioned in the new member orientation that Jesus and Sandy told us immediately. They said, you know, in order to be part of a quorum, you have to be present to the meeting, and give us very specific instructions about, you know, if you're not going to attend, what are the ramifications for that. So they were very clear on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to be clear, the 1 new member who isn't with us today, you know, she's out of the country due to some family circumstances, and even if she were in the country, she's under the weather, so, you know, the new members are there.
But it's,
What's,
I mean,
what's the
it's-
quorum count again? What's the quorum
need
count
quorum
again?
count is 6, because we have
6.
10 committee members. We now have 10 committee members.
Right, and how many are attending?
There are exactly 5 committee members who are either here in person or attending virtually due to temporary disability. So, we have 5 who count towards quorum. We need 6 for quorum. So we do not have quorum.
Alright. Alright.
So,
I don't see anything preventing you, Steve, from going ahead and doing your draft, though.
yeah, I mean, that's,
We just, yeah,
we, this was kind of an informational discussion. I wanted to get some perspective to see what would the feelings were of people who are here, and,
Yeah.
you know, then we can discuss it when we have
Yeah.
quorum at the next.
No, I'm all for it.
and the other thing I'll say is even if we did have quorum, there wasn't a resolution sent ahead of time, so even if the committee did have quorum, it wouldn't have been able to vote on a resolution unless there was a particular time sensitivity to it, which it is important, but, I guess not so pressing it needs to be voted on at this meeting.
Great. Any other thoughts before we move on to the next item? That was kind of our big agenda item for this meeting, but I'll turn it over to Nat for chair's report.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I would say the main thing, and for new members and old members, is we have our budget meeting, our big one of the year next meeting, which is September 30th. So what I would say for that is everybody take some time ahead of that to review them. There's like the budget airtable on the website. So I'll just review that ahead of time just to get a sense of it. I'd also say in your other committees, just pester your chairs to make sure they're updated. Me and Steve are chasing them too, but I think it helps to have more people just making sure those requests are updated. Because if you remember, what we do at that meeting is really just go through those requests and just really figure out, you know, do these requests make sense? Some committees don't update them, so it ends up falling on us, but really they're the ones with the expertise. So the committees can update it, it's generally better. Other thing I would say is if you're on those committees, try to get them to update those new criteria we added this year. If you remember, we added those in the spring. Those would be really helpful for us in that meeting to really be able to say, okay, let's see what is the likelihood or the feasibility, and really understand those in a deeper level than we have in previous years. So I think it'd be really good to get as high adherence to those new things as possible. And I would just remind like the chairs, like those are pretty easy to do. It's a high, medium, low. It's inherently like still kind of subjective. They don't have to do like any like fancy math or anything to get those things. So I would say just push your committee chairs to do that. We're pushing them too. And I think that meeting will be a good one with that. And we'll use that to really inform one, how that helps our process, but also two, like what we want to do going forward as we reflect on that for future years.
And my other committee is public safety and sanitation, and we did work through the criteria and it actually worked pretty well. So we prioritized them and we ranked them. So, well, granted, we only had 2 budget items, so it was easy, but still, it was a decent exercise, and hopefully the other committees do as well. So it just makes our life a little bit easier for our September 30th public hearing on the budget requests. Great, anything else from chair's report? Okay, if any member of the committee has any old or new business, please raise your hand.
I'm
Yes,
sorry,
go ahead, Jim.
I'm working on my phone here. I don't see the thing to.
Sorry, Jim, you're muted. Did you want to say something?
I was looking for the button to raise your hand and I hit the mic. I've been pushing for some time now to get a meeting with a representative of the New York City Comptroller, a couple of years actually, and we have not been able to get one. And I'm just wondering if we can proceed and solicit someone to come from their office and give a presentation. I've had issues for quite some time of with respect to what the city is using as a assumed rate or compounded annual growth rate on the city pensions. You may be aware that currently they're using 7%, which given interest rates at this point is not unreal, but New York State uses interest rates that are, if I recollect, about 100 basis points lower, and it troubles me because having that level of assumed compounded annual growth rate, you end up with a higher risk premium for the city's investments, which can come back and bite us in the rear end pretty badly during a market downturn, as we've seen in 2008 and during the pandemic. So I'm just wondering if we can again attempt to get a meeting with somebody from the controller's office, ideally somebody from their investment staff. He has a CFA currently on his staff, and perhaps that would be the best person to speak with, just to get an explanation as to why they're using such a high interest rate relative to what the rest of what New York State is using. Doesn't make sense. And so incidentally, they had used that 7% interest assumed compounded annual growth rate back when the Fed was using a zero interest rate policy. So the risk premium was ridiculously high.
So given your question is pretty specific, I'm wondering, would we be able to channel that question to them and get a response rather than, getting
I think there's a lot of things that we should probably talk to them about. I mean, that's my specific question, but
you're saying
I'm sure that there are others I'm sure there are others that the controller could or should address, what our funding looks like for the next the out years. You know, what the real estate tax base is going to look like. Man, we're seeing a lot of real estate in the city losing market value, and how that will impact the tax revenues that we're dealing with. I think there's a lot of issues that we should, as a budget and governmental affairs committee, would have for the controller's staff. I mean, my particular issue is that compounded annual growth rate, but I'm sure that there are others will have questions about.
So have we ever had the comptroller's office come speak to our committee or a representative?
No.
Okay.
And I believe that we have requested it. The chairs have requested it in the past couple of chairs. Like I say, I've been asking for it since, oh God, at least 4 or 5 years. And can't seem to ever get anybody to respond.
And I can work on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say one thing to Steve's point, like, I think it's worth just seeing what questions we actually have, I think. Because I think to your point, Steve, like, if it's just like these targeted questions on sort of the assumed rate of return, I think letting them just, given they haven't come in the past, maybe it is even more effective just to send them a note on that. We can get an answer for that. I just don't want to invite them for like an hour and only have like 10 minutes of questions or something. So I think it's worth just like circling up on that of like, what questions do others have? If not, we can just send that one question over, maybe one that gets the question answered, and two, like, we just avoid, we enable them to be efficient with their time as well.
So the reason
I raised it now is it looks like we're going into a period where we're going to see lower interest rates again. And if we're going to stick with another 7% compounded annual growth rate, which we've held for years now, several years, I mean, going back probably to 2008, 2010, then we're again building on more of the risk premium. So I think it's something that needs to be addressed. I mean, what happens is the controller and elected officials generally like to pump up that compounded annual growth rate because they get to spend money on other things rather than making the pension contributions that we're legally and morally obligated to fund. And I think it's time that, we as members of the community and the community board hold them accountable and ask, why are you doing this? We're going to probably go down between 25 and 50 basis points this week and or next week, and I just think it's time to address the issue.
Okay, noted. Maybe I can work with Nat and see if there's other questions, we can get those together. And the other issue that is sort of pending old business was the issue that I had raised before the summer recess on property taxes. And that maybe if we do end up having some kind of a public hearing, comptroller's office might attend if we were to invite them, and that might be another angle on which we can engage them on a specific issue, which is property tax reform. But there may be other issues that come up as things come up in the agendas.
I just
Yes,
had a
go ahead,
question.
Emer.
Going back to the redistricting, you said that possibly we would be contacting certain people in the legislature regarding how we should proceed and so forth. The reason I wanted to mention this is that State Senator Liz Kruger was the senator that represented this little chunk of our community that is now connected with Queens. So these were her constituents, and I wanted to know if possibly a representative from her office could give us some suggestions as to how we should proceed, so that we're coming back into the fold, so to speak, in terms of what she represented, prior to what happened to us, with our being connected, to Queens. Is that something that you think should be done in a public hearing, or a representative from her office should come to our board and speak to our committee and speak with us directly as to how we should proceed?
Well, the first step, I think, is to come up with a resolution, because that is kind of how the board can speak to all the electeds. And so when a resolution passes, it goes to all of the different elected officials. And so that kind of makes it known that that is kind of an agenda item for our community, for our district. And then from there, we can decide if there's more targeted actions that we may need to do in the future,
Well,
to sort of push it along. But I think first is to get the board on
Right.
board with, this kind of.
well, as a subset, though, that particular chunk seems to be the only part that has really affected our community, that particular section that is now, so that, to me, if it's going to be more general, then that should be addressed next, because that really affected a large part of her constituency. And I feel she has been very effective when she was representing all of us. So,
Mhm.
okay.
Right, I got you.
Oh.
So we can sort of like talk about how we would work that into the language of the
Okay,
resolution,
all
and then
All right,
kind of decide how we go from there.
all right, thank you.
Great, I think that's the end of the what we had on the agenda. So we'll make a motion to, anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Great, so seeing no further business, the meeting is adjourned at 7:11.